Hello and welcome. We are live right now on YouTube, Instagram, and more. But just a quick note, this is actually a live premiere of a pre-recorded conversation that first dropped for paying supporters at colememo.com/Patreon. For just $3 a month, patrons get early access to new episodes before anyone else. And there's also a free tier. So if you just want to follow along and stay connected, that's an option. All of my content always gets released for free. In this episode, we're sitting down with someone who's spent decades working behind the scenes in Springfield, Illinois to help shape policy, navigate legislation, and influence how decisions actually get made in the Capitol. From cannabis to broader drug policy and beyond, this conversation is going to pull back the curtain on how it all works in Springfield, Illinois. And on a personal note, this is someone who actually played a role in inspiring me to start this podcast in the first place. If you're catching this later and you're wondering how to tune into these live premieres, head on over to colememo.com/YouTube and subscribe so that you never miss a stream. You can also find this podcast on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at colememo.com, where you can find all of my work. If you'd like to support the show, you can head on over to colememo.com/support, or as I mentioned, you can become a patron at colememo.com/Patreon. That's colememo.com/PATREON. That support goes directly toward keeping this show running. Folks, the best way to support this show is by smashing that like button, subscribing, or by leaving a positive rating from wherever you're listening from. It really does help more than you might think. I know that all of the content creators say it, but folks, it really does make a huge difference. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for another episode of
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo is what allows this whole thing to go on.
I mean, you have to respect the memo.
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're listening and watching The Cole Memo.
And now I'm joined by Mark Peysakhovich. Mark, welcome to The Cole Memo. How's it going?
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a longtime listener, so thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why that means a lot to me here in a moment. But before I do that, can you introduce yourself to my audience in case they may not be aware of who you are like I am?
Hi, and I'm sure most people are not aware. My name is Mark Peysakhovich. I am a lobbyist. I focus on state legislative affairs in Springfield, although I do some other units of government, and I've been working in this field basically ever since I graduated from college. So it's been a good 30 plus years. I am the managing partner of my firm, MBM Advantage LLC, and I serve a variety of clients as a contract lobbyist. A lot of my work right now, or sort of at least the work that's currently popping, as it were, is actually focused on healthcare issues. But I have all sorts of clients and have worked extensively on hemp, cannabis, psilocybin, and many other things.
Awesome. And yeah, we love talking about those things on this show, so we'll probably get into that. That's also interesting to hear, though, that, it kind of lines up with other things I'm hearing, that, it's like cost of living and healthcare. Those are becoming, top of mind, not only here in the state of Illinois, but around the country. So maybe we'll get into a little bit of that, but we'll see. I just wanted to start with, you told me, dude, you were born in Russia and you moved to Chicago. Can you just give me a little bit of like your life story and how you found yourself in lobbying? And then maybe we can talk about what lobbying has even been like as a profession.
Sure. Yeah, well, so we came here when I was 10 years old in 1980. I came with my parents and my brother, and we were essentially escaping religious persecution. I was born in Moscow, and just as an example, in first grade in Moscow, I got beat up in the bathroom of my school because the Russians, the 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 understanding that was that Jews killed Christ, and so can you blame the little kids in the bathroom for going after me for such a crime?
Right.
In any case, we came to this country, and I guess I went to a very nice, exclusive Hebrew day school on scholarship as a Jewish immigrant. And there I encountered a lot of lovely people who were a lot richer than I was, and so I was sort of went from being the other in Russia for being a Jew to being the other at a Jewish school in America for being a Russian.
Right.
And so, while I certainly never can talk about other people's experiences, especially Black folks or people who can't lie, like I was raised to lie about my not being a Jew, I can, as I like to say, I'm pretty empathetic and woke for a white American male for all those experiences, and was sort of came up as the other, which I think informs my life in many ways, good and bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking as a fellow person that's very light in complexion, yes, we get a lot of breaks. So for you to experience some, for lack of better words, like discrimination, like I'm sure that adds to your character, your experience, like whereas some people just don't experience that, because of their complexion. So
Right.
not to get too much into it, but
Right. I'd like to think so.
yeah.
I'd like to think so.
So how do you, were you just like always interested in politics? Like how do you find, when did you get into lobbying? I can't imagine you got right into it out of high school.
Well, first of all, I always knew that I needed to do something that's not related to mathematics or science. I'm not particularly intelligent, generally speaking, but I am particularly unintelligent in, anything than basic addition and subtraction and multiplication. And, never like to memorize the periodical chart. Was never big on dissecting frogs. Came to college realizing that, I guess, using language, for better or worse, would be a place where I might find some traction, since I wasn't really good at anything else. And the other thing that informed my sort of interest in politics was, especially when I first came here, even then, I knew that, in Russia, if you say something bad about the government, you go to jail, because, that was something that was drilled into me ever since I could speak and understand. And so I found it fascinating that, Americans could, or at least used to be able to, criticize their government freely, and that was always very interesting to me. And so I sort of began paying attention to politics even when I was in high school. But I had a formative moment in college where I, for a politics class, was an intern for a campaign for a legislator. It was actually somebody who's now a prominent member of Congress. Her name is Jan Schakowsky. She's actually retiring after a very illustrious career in Congress. But I was involved in her first successful state representative campaign. And that was, for college credit. That wasn't even for pay. But she sort of became a role model and a friend and my fairy godmother. And that set me on a career trajectory, in part because, I don't know, in a way, it's sort of whatever the career equivalent is of you are what you eat. I started with politics.
Yeah.
And that's where I went. And, had several really amazingly interesting jobs, and, took me a good 25 years to learn how to actually be a lobbyist. And finally, about 10 years ago, I hung up my shingle as a contract lobbyist, and here I am.
Gotcha. So for people that don't know, because I think this is one of the many reasons I was excited to talk to you. What is a lobbyist?
That's a great question, and a lot of people have different definitions. I take my work for my clients very seriously. I don't necessarily take myself very seriously, which I actually think helps me as a lobbyist, because oftentimes I'm, confronted with saying to myself, well, don't worry, that particular legislator is ignoring much more important people than you right now, not just you. But I would say that a good analogy would be to a plumber. I make sure that things move through the system from point A to point B without getting stuck. Alternatively, unlike a plumber, sometimes I actually have to do the opposite and clog the pipes so something doesn't get from point A to point B. And that's defense. And that's actually probably more of actual lobbying, is playing defense on behalf of your clients than affirmatively sort of always having a big agenda proactively. But more seriously, a lobbyist is somebody who represents whatever issues or causes they're working on. They represent their clients, be it an in-house lobbyist for a specific cause. For example, I was head of government affairs for the American Heart Association in Illinois for a long time. So, a lobbyist is somebody who represents either their client as in their employer or their client as a contract lobbyist, which is what I do, and have a number of clients. And I'm essentially their mouthpiece in Springfield, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, thank you for explaining that. And I want to talk about what that's been like. But first, I wanted to explain to my audience why another reason that I've been so excited for this particular episode. And it's because you actually are among, I would say, at the top of the list of people that inspired me to start my own show. I remember you hosted the Cannabis Community Insider, I think it was.
Yeah, but by the way, if you ever want to use that label, you're more than welcome. I even still have the website for that. I'll give it to you.
I don't think I can take the label, man. You're much more inside than me, but no, even down to some of the things I said at the beginning to some of the things I still say today, the future of this show depends on your feedback. Note taken, Mark. I heard you say that all the time. I was like, that's a really good line so that people feel like they can, get involved and interact and engage. And so I just wanted to let you know that not only is the basis of the foundation of my knowledge on cannabis policy, I credit to you, but also doing this, I mention you all the time when people ask me, like, why did you start the podcast? It's like, well, I've always liked podcasting. I've always loved cannabis. And so I just thought, maybe mix the two. And like I said, I was listening to your podcast back, I think in 2019. And finally, when adult use passed, I was like, because I was a medical patient at the time, but even then, um, I still didn't feel comfortable enough to get on the camera and light up like I just did with you like a little bit ago. You know what I mean? Like there was still some
Mhm.
stigma. And so 2020 was the year I kind of came out of the cannabis closet. And like I say, man, you're top of the list of people I credit for that. So thank you for being an inspiration. And I remember that I ran into you in Springfield. I don't even know when at this point. I was there just sort of talking to legislators as a consumer because I love these cannabis beverages that I can get sent to my door. And this whole concept of hemp has afforded me more access to the cannabis plant than any state-based program, including our own. And so I want to keep that progress. I wanted to retain it and have an informative conversation. And I ran into you, and you told me you had heard of my show, and like that just it was the biggest compliment. And I just wanted to say thank you for all those things. Yeah.
I mean, that just, thank you for feeding my soul. I appreciate it. I will say that my spouse, as well as a bunch of other suburban moms in her friend circle, are all consumers of the hemp THC beverages. And they're actually particularly upset that those might be going away. I don't want to get into the sort of the science or medicine of it, but I do sincerely believe that people are better off having a couple of those than drinking alcohol. And so, yeah, just to say, those beverages have a home in my home. Although I'm still primarily, my use is smoking. For some reason, the edibles just don't hit me right. Or the digestibles, I should say.
Right. Yeah. Some people
Um,
just don't digest them the same, I think, as others. Yeah.
it just is a total different feeling. And what I would say is that the most important effect that's missing, that seems to be digested out, is the euphoria of it,
Yeah.
which is like, you know, if you don't have that, I'm not sure,
It's like the whole point, right?
I suppose. And
For
again,
some. I mean, if you're having a good time, I guess.
and I will acknowledge you, and as well as I, are medical patients, and it's definitely not just about the euphoria.
Right.
And because of my immigrant experience that I talked about, there's plenty of PTSD and other associated craziness, as it were.
Hi. Since you're listening to the Cole Memo podcast, I imagine you probably are too. Hey, just a quick reminder, this episode dropped for our paying patrons. You can become a patron now at colememo.com/Patreon. I'm displaying that link on screen right now, and I'm going to send you right back into the conversation. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
And so I totally understand the medicinal use of cannabis, but I'm still a fan of euphoria nonetheless, and the digestibles just don't do it for me. But
Yeah.
to get back on track, thank you very much. As I see your work, I sort of chuckle at my own amateurishness and ham-handedness, and fully acknowledge that I'm a better lobbyist than I ever was a podcaster. But part of why I did it, I mean, there was no sense that this was going to bring me fame or fortune, but there was a lot of a sense of during the medical and after the medical, there was just so much misinformation and lack of understanding. And sort of, so many people, that were much too optimistic, as we've seen on retrospect. When I worked with cannabis clients, I sometimes accused them of smoking hopium. They were hoping too much. They were smoking hopium. And so the bottom line is, part of why I did it was to fill a space. Nobody else was just sort of getting straight across information out. Nobody else was interviewing legislators, who were actually the ones, the single most important, source of law, I guess. I mean, they're the ones who did what we have now. And there was just not a lot of understanding, still isn't, about lobbying. I think, and maybe I'm just giving myself too much credit, but it's like, nobody comes out and says, oh, I could be a doctor. When you meet a doctor, you don't say, oh, I could do that. I often think I could, when I meet people, they're often like, oh, I think I'd be a great lobbyist. And it's like, sure you would. But everything takes a while to perfect. And I guess I did it because there was a niche to fill. And ultimately, I'm glad that you're in that niche and you're a much better fit, for all it's worth.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And not only for those kind words, but for the inspiration again. So let's talk about lobbying. I just wanted to take a pit stop to thank you. So, you mentioned how you got into it. I wanted to talk about your experience because, like you were just saying, even I think I have thought to myself, oh, I'd be a great lobbyist. And one thing you said that really struck a chord with me, that like made me think like, okay, I'm probably not alone in having that feeling, is you said, if I just get in there and explain the facts, surely they'll just understand and make the right decision. Can you talk a little bit? I know I just start off with a very specific example, but I think that's the optimism that you were speaking about, or maybe the hopium. I don't know the right word that I'm trying to say, but I think you get my point. Can you tell us about your experience in lobbying, just generally speaking?
Yeah, well, to that point, everybody, wants to argue their position on the merits, understanding that they have a meritorious position. And clearly, if I just articulate it, um, they'll come around, or they'll jump and down and say, yeah, I'll sponsor that idea as a bill. But the reality is that, yes, everybody acts on the merits, but not everybody defines the merits the same way. And not everybody defines priorities the same way. And so one of the things most people don't understand is that for most things that are, sort of in any way complicated or controversial, there's usually somebody who's making the argument that's opposite you that is also making a merit-based argument. The people who don't want cannabis legalized are, a lot of them, incredibly sincere, well-meaning, sort of old-fashioned, values-based people who think that, truly this is the devil's lettuce. And so, just to use this issue as an example, anything that is, almost anything that's worth doing, that's worth lobbying for, is going to have, sort of every action will have an equal and opposite reaction. And so that's one of the things that people fall into the trap of, is thinking that no other point of view could logically be meritorious or sympathetic, that no other story, no other narrative could, be as important, as compelling as yours. And that's just simply not true. So one of the things, I guess, that a lobbyist is a good translator and storyteller. Just today, with one of my, clients who, are using very science-based, very clinical language, and I had to say, look, give me the version, treat me like I'm an eighth grader, okay? No more than that, and no more than a few sentences, okay? Because most people will give you an answer that's way too long and way too complicated, and they're not accounting for people who are, I don't know, insurance agents or, farmers or teachers, and don't necessarily have the same level of understanding. And so I think being a good storyteller, being a good translator is very important. The other thing I like to tell people is that generally, and this is sort of one of those phrases I use to try to educate clients on how to approach things. I like to tell them that uh, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Okay. And that's very, very important. Of course, that also favors somebody like me who cares much more than he knows usually. But I think there is that, having a relationship, being able to tell a story is very important, and understanding that your perspective is not the only perspective that's valuable, that's worth something, that has merit, um, is all very, very important. So if you just, sort of to go with that theme, say, well, clearly, if I just lay out the facts, surely they'll understand and do the right thing. You need to understand that there's a lot more information out there than what you're going to tell them in the 5 minutes you talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really interesting thought, because I've gotten flack because I've actually brought on some of the largest and most well known groups that lobby against legalization, smart approaches to marijuana. I'm sure you've seen some of their staffers or whatever in Springfield.
I'm on their email list, so yeah, I see it, and again, I'm on their email list for the exact same reason that you had them on your show.
Yeah, well, and my point in bringing it up is like, some people debate me with this, but I've, spent time with these people. Like I literally met Jordan, who's been on the show in the past. By the way, if folks want to check that out, colememo.com/Sam. That's a link to all of our interviews that we've done. But I've met these people and they're not pretending. I think they believe, like they truly believe what they're saying. And that's hard for people that listen to my show to like, I guess it's hard for me to understand, admittedly, because I disagree. Looked like you wanted to say something on this topic.
No. I'm just like aggressively agreeing, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Because it's just like, yeah, I don't know. And so that's been a thing for me where it's like, some people will ask me, why do you platform them? It's like, I think it's really helpful to hear what these people actually believe because I don't want you as somebody that's, a proponent of this policy to be like surprised when somebody brings up something that I'm going to opinion it. This is my opinion. Sometimes I think some of the things they say are crazy, but I don't want you to be like, in a time where seconds count, when you're having a debate. I don't want people to be dumbfounded by things that get brought up. So even if I disagree with these perspectives, I think there's value in hearing them and being armed and ready to respond to them. I guess if that makes sense.
Absolutely. One of the first things I ask my clients or prospective clients, when they lay out their agenda, usually my first question is, well, who's going to be opposed to this?
Yeah.
If I didn't ask that question right away, I'd be committing, lobbying malpractice.
Yeah.
Because you definitely want to understand who will either be hurt by this or perceive to be hurt by this or think they might be hurt by this, and and how. But yes, absolutely, I don't know if you sort of want to broach psilocybin on that
Sure.
note, but there over the last several years, there have been proposals to implement a psilocybin medical psilocybin treatment system in Illinois, and frankly, personally, I find it fascinating. I went to a liberal arts college and spent many months touring with the Grateful Dead, so I'm by no means a stranger to psilocybin.
I promise this will be one of the last times I cut in with a request. Please rate this podcast favorably from wherever you're listening from. For example, if you're listening from Spotify or Apple Podcast, leave a 5-star review and say that you love this podcast, or hit the thumbs up button. Whatever you need to do to leave a favorable rating, please do that. It makes a huge difference and it allows more people to see and hear the show, which is a great way to support the show. Support the media that you want to see in this world. Back to the episode.
But we do have an objection to standing up a system that subverts or goes around FDA approval, because then it's not a medicine. And I actually happen to agree with that. Obviously, cannabis did not have that FDA approval, and I, advocated for that, and I use it now. So I think, wouldn't be the first time I felt as if I was or would be accused of being a hypocrite. But I also, have significant experience with cannabis, and have, years of experience with psilocybin and other hallucinogenics. I can say it ain't the same thing. And I think, medicating somebody with something that will last 12 hours and will require sort of on-site supervision seems to be, to me, significant enough to where there ought to be FDA protocols. The other thing is that doctors can't be involved if it's not FDA approved, because they'll lose their prescription license, because they cannot be involved in, recommending or advising on or overseeing something that is a federally illegal substance, because the federal government gives them their prescription authority. So again, look at me. I sound like, a card-carrying, cop-loving Sam member, right? I mean, all of a sudden I'm making the opposite argument. But to me, it's perfectly consistent. Study it, do the science, and make it a medicine. And I, and by the way, I thought if cannabis was legalized, one of the things that we could do would be to study it and make it a medicine. And I think that would happen. What I don't think is that it's going to happen without the profit motive, right?
Sure.
I think the downside to it being studied and FDA regulated and becoming a medicine is that it'll be pharmaceutical companies that reap those rewards, and not, cannabis and psilocybin advocates. But I would certainly be very interested in understanding more about both cannabis and psilocybin as an actual medicine.
Look, I'll be candid. I've been pretty impressed with what we've been able to do with this show. And I say we because, again, I could not have done any of this without your support. Check out some of my high profile episodes at colememo.com/guest index. I tried to put together a compilation of some of my most high profile episodes. So if you're looking to see interviews I've done with elected officials, journalists, executives from some of these companies that are selling Schedule 1 drugs, check out colememo.com/guest index. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
So I think that having the perspective of Sam is very, very important, in part so I can parse where I might agree with their concerns and where I don't agree with their concerns. And one place where I don't agree with their concerns is if you keep things illegal, you maintain ignorance on those things.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. I could get into all of their policy positions, and maybe I'll write it down. Maybe we will. But I wanted to. I was super excited to talk to you about your experience at cannabis lobbying and other drug policy, and so you brought it up. But before we, and maybe this will just come out naturally. But I just wanted to give you more space. Like, has lobbying been what you thought it would be, or was your like, were you just like, wow, this is how the sausage is made?
Well, so in the Soviet Union, my mom would go through a lot of chocolate every time we went to the doctor, or every time she saw my teacher or anything else. She brought a gift of expensive chocolate because that was the way you got things done in the Soviet Union. Now, it wasn't always as simple or as inexpensive as fancy chocolate. Sometimes, if you wanted to go to a doctor and have that doctor care about, curing your loved one, you would bring them many thousands of dollars in bribes. When we had to get out of the country, we had to pay, the Russian equivalent of Customs and Border Patrol a lot of bribes to be able to, get valuables out of the country so they wouldn't steal them on the way out. So I can understand. I was much closer philosophically to where the sausage is made than your typical, again, person who thinks if I only just tell them the merits of this. Okay, that's one view. Another view, though, is that there are an incredible number of people who work incredibly hard, care a whole lot, and just want to do the right things. They know they're not going to get rich. They get a lot of flack. They are, these legislators are constantly working because there's no such thing as a day off, because everybody else's day off is the day that you catch those people.
Right.
For a politician. And you're constantly have evening meetings, and there's nowhere to escape. You're at the grocery store, somebody will try to buttonhole you that recognizes you. And so to me, I think what was actually more, given my cynical approach to government just from the very beginning as a little kid, with government officials, jailing or putting in mental institutions people that spoke against them. I actually found the admirable things more surprising in some ways about government. And there are a lot of incredibly smart, incredibly passionate, incredibly well-intentioned folks that just work 24/7, 365. They don't get paid all that much. I mean, it's a decent job, but it's, not anywhere near six figures, just as an example. And, you're in Springfield for weeks on end sometimes, at least January through June. So I actually, the part that was more surprising to me was not the sausage making part of it, but the other part of it, the respect part of it. And so in that way, it was actually interesting. But yes, again, as we alluded to before, it's not about you're always making an argument on the merits, but you have to understand the merits of the person you're talking to, rather than the merits you assume that they will have or believe or whatever. But there's I wasn't surprised, but it took years and years and years and years to learn how to handle situations correctly, how to, for me, silence is very, very difficult. I'm one of those people who feels compelled to fill in empty space. I've learned to keep my mouth shut, and that's an ongoing project, as my wife and daughter would agree. I have learned that sometimes the best thing to do is nothing, which again has been incredibly difficult. I have learned that most things are not personal. Okay. When I was younger, I was just indignant with these folks who would work the opposite of me on an issue. I would, and this might say something about my state of my mental health. I would immediately start making up a speech in my head as to how I would just chastise them. How could they do this? It is so wrong. And how could they do it to me? And then that's when I began to learn that they feel the same way about me potentially, and we don't even know each other.
Yeah.
Right. And so those kinds of things you have to learn. You have to learn patience. You have to learn, I actually bastardized an old Abraham Lincoln phrase to sort of as my mantra for not taking things personally. What I say to myself sometimes is, don't attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity.
Yeah.
Okay. And to me, that just made all the difference in the world, because to me, that was my way of saying that they don't mean to do this to you. They just,
Right.
don't understand the merits the same way you do.
Exactly.
Lobbying continues to be humbling and educational, and new and different and exciting and nerve-wracking. I just, the lobbyists that I want to know are the ones who don't have a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't think there are a lot of those. But you walk into that building and it can make you feel real small. And that's also something to learn how to sort of to take into perspective. I like to, as I think I've said to you before, I like to remind myself when I reach out to a legislator and they don't get back to me right away. And, then I learn 2 days later, well, the Secretary of State called him that same day. They haven't returned his call either, because they've been busy, legislating or being parents or whatever. And so, I often say to myself, don't worry, Mark, this person is blowing off much more important people than just you.
Right.
That makes me feel better. So
I like how we have our little coping mechanisms. Because the one
exactly
thing that
right.
you said, the thing you said about not attributing malice to what could be ignorance or stupidity, like that's a big one for me. That's helped a lot. It's like nobody woke up this morning. It's like I'm gonna, they're putting their pants on. I'm gonna make Mark mad today. Like
right.
they just
That's right.
encounter you along the way, and
Right.
they're doing what they think is right or whatever they're paid to do. I don't mean to always say that they whatever, but.
Oh no! By
know.
the way, let's talk about payment. Payment's important.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but yes, I am paid to work on the things that I'm paid to work on, and I certainly have no problem with it. I generally think I'm worth the money.
Yeah.
And I will, say without any hesitation that people who have lobbyists are much more effective in public policy making than people who don't have lobbyists. I'm a hammer, so maybe every problem I see is a nail, right?
Yeah.
That's best served by hiring the likes of me. But I also have no problem saying that, you don't, you don't try to change your transmission yourself unless you're a very, small percentage of the population. You don't pull your own teeth out. You don't, get your own cancer treatment. And you don't just go to somebody and say, Google it. Well, I think I could do it. I watched some videos. And so I think in that way, lobbyists definitely, through time, blood, sweat, and tears, generally earn their keep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just learning how to navigate. I'm using Springfield as an example because we're in Illinois, but a Capitol building and how everything works, from committees to actually to the debates on the floor. It's a lot to keep track of. And then, set aside the fact that, like, for example, myself as an advocate, like, I'll hear about a hearing that's really close and near and dear to my heart. So I am privileged enough to where I can have a conversation with, the people that I work with and be like, hey, I'm taking time off. I'm going to do this. I go down to Springfield. It's a 2-hour drive. I know somebody else that's come down 6 hours. And then the hearing just gets canceled. And then, and unfortunately I was able to make it, but like these things happen, and not knowing how to traverse and navigate and see when it's scheduled, where it's at. And, even the decorum, what you do and don't do and how do you address it. Like, there's just so much to it that I think people don't see on the surface. They think maybe, well, I'll just call a few representatives and, like you say, I'll just explain myself and they'll get it. It's like, yeah, but it's more than just that. So, not to dwell on that point too much, I just wanted to kind of, pop the hood a bit. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, cannabis policy. I wanted to talk about that. You were involved like pre 2000, like pre legalization, correct?
Yeah, and I've been involved. A lot of people ask, and I'm very. I guess one of my trademarks as a lobbyist is I'm one of the sort of blunt, honest ones. So you can take me or leave me. And
Sure.
Some people love working with me, others do not and don't hire me. But I sort of am very open about my motivations, experiences, about my history. And when people say, "Well, how long have you worked on cannabis?" Or "How long have you been involved with cannabis?" I say, "Since I was 14 years old." And that's the truth. But having Springfield 25 years ago was an incredibly different place, right? As was the rest of the world. Things were just different. And one of the things that made me stand out in Springfield is that I was always I was never a big drinker. I'm not a big drinker. And my choice is usually to use cannabis. Not doing something that everybody else was doing constantly, and doing something else that at that point was, much more stigmatized and illegal. I developed a cadre of friends, including many legislators. I got high with legislators long before it became cool. And being able to keep those confidences for decades, being able to have those relationships as, sort of peers who share a secret, rather than, public figures,
Right.
I think was incredibly invaluable to me, to establishing myself and learning and all those other things. And And the other thing is that as we got closer to medical and then recreational, my reputation actually, wasn't like, well, he's a pothead, ignore him. Was like, well, he knows what he's talking about. He's been, he has firsthand knowledge of the good and the bad, and he's always willing to tell you the truth, the good and the bad. So, those that I did get high with trusted me, and all the other ones trusted me because they knew the other ones trusted me, and I knew what I was talking about. And so, frankly, that's why I'm good at working on sort of substance issues, whether I'm for them or against them, is that long track record of experience of being able to talk to legislators like they're normal people about this stuff, and leading with my own admissions and acknowledgments.
If you'd like to share a scoop or just help me, reach out at colememo.com/contact. I'm kind of a one-man band, and it is hard to do what I do. It's not free, it's not easy. And so if you're able to help, even by way of just reaching out with words of support, or like I say, sharing a scoop, or by helping, please reach out at colememo.com/contact. Similarly, if you'd like to be on the show, reach out colememo.com/contact. It is, busy booking the show, but I'll do my best to try to squeeze you in if it makes sense. No promises, of course. Once again, colememo.com/contact. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
I think that gives me a perspective that's much more meaningful and deep than just being the lobbyist. And in the same way, I'm not ashamed to say that, I've been around cannabis and other substances, for most of my adult life, which is not to say that I use all of them, because I actually don't like most of them other than cannabis. If you give me hallucinogenics or alcohol or cannabis, I will always choose cannabis. So my understanding and experience and work on this sort of predates my actual work on this. And I'm very open about that. And as I've said, I think that level of understanding, technical knowledge, but also empathy, has come in handy.
What do you remember about the push for medical and adult use cannabis? Like any highlights? I have some things that I remember that I want to ask you about and see if you remember, like as a boots on the ground perspective. But I just wanted to start off at a high level. Like, what do you recall about the fight for medical and adult use cannabis?
Oh, I mean, I actually remember certain personalities like Lou Lang, who was the state representative who, legalized medical cannabis, or was the lead, I think. From adult use, how can you not remember working with, Kelly Cassidy and Jehan Gordon Booth and Heather Staines, that they called themselves the three moms that worked on cannabis. So I remember a lot of the personalities. You also remember I certainly remember, and recently, came across some old photos on my phone from like the day of the vote when I was sitting in the gallery waiting for the vote to take place. I remember I actually had a sort of a.
If you can share that, that'd be cool. By the way, the photo.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure. There's a few I can send it, but you also can go back to my Facebook and mine it for all it's worth. But I also, one of the sort of the things that I was very specifically involved with was chronic pain. So in Illinois, chronic pain was not a allowable condition for medical cannabis. which was a bad thing for the cannabis industry because that was a major driver of sales, was chronic pain in other states. And here the medical started very, very slow. I mean, it wasn't, we needed the expansion of chronic pain, just as an example. And so I was hired by a, prominent cannabis company. All the cannabis companies had lobbyists. And one of the things that I worked on very specifically was the opioid alternatives program. And it's interesting how it came to be, because talk about sort of, so we wanted to add chronic pain to the list of allowable conditions. At that point, the governor, Bruce Rauner, was very opposed to that. He was a very prohibitionist governor, and said, basically, over my dead body will I sign any legislation that allows chronic pain to be a condition, because then every pothead and hippie is going to come and say that, something hurts and get weed legally. And so we were faced with this situation, but the governor wasn't really focused on sort of the idea of chronic pain. He was focused on the words. And he was very literal when he said, I'm not going to sign anything that, focuses on chronic pain.
Yeah.
Or has the chronic pain in it. And so it was actually, I was fortunate enough to sort of, out of desperation, think about it. Well, all right, what's the treatment for chronic pain? It's opioids. And so we actually then, subsequently worked with the sponsors, because understand, lobbyists are just a cog in the machine. It's ultimately the sponsors that do the heavy lifting. Sometimes it's easier for them, sometimes it's harder, but in no way are lobbyists central figures in passing legislation. But we do have technical expertise, and so we were able to go to a sponsor and say, how about if we do legislation that basically says if you're eligible for opioids, you should be eligible for medical cannabis as an alternative. And that's how the medical cannabis opioid alternative program came to be. And that was so that was a very specific thing. And, again, I think in some ways demonstrates the value of a lobbyist as a plumber. And making sure things move through the system without friction. I don't know, maybe too long of a story, but it's one of the things that I remember, obviously, because it features me as the hero. So there you go.
There you go. Yeah. No, that's an awesome story. I didn't know about that, and that's just that's very interesting. And I recall that vaguely, because that was about the time I was like watching the program. There's a few things I wanted to get out of the way, if you will, for lack of better words. It was the fingerprinting, the background check. Those were things that I was not interested in doing. And so as soon as the program changed, and I think they also introduced like a provisional registration at that time, which was super cool, because when I did get my recommendation, it wasn't actually, you know what? I just missed the window. I think it was passed into law, but it was still something they were developing in rulemaking or something. But still, to see that go live for others was really awesome, because I had to wait 90 days, and guess what? The 90th day fell on Christmas. The post office wasn't open that day, so on the 26th, I got my medical card, and yeah.
Well, there you go. Yeah, and I mean, the whole fingerprinting thing was so ridiculous.
Right.
I kept having to remind people that cancer and HIV don't fingerprint. Why should we? But, it just is, it was a sort of a random thing that was, like there wasn't a huge push to fingerprint people, right? It's not like somebody necessarily was insisting on it. As far as I could aware, people were sitting around, from different agencies going, what else can we do to make this secure? And the state police say, well, maybe we fingerprint him. There you go. I'm not aware of any deep thought that went into something that would be such a barrier and so consequential to cannabis access.
Yeah. One thing that people talk about all the time, and speaking of something, I don't know, it's like I've seen it reported by the Chicago Tribune. This is the only outlet, but there's a lot of talk online about like the idea that some of the cannabis operators lobbied against home grow. Did you recall any of that? Is there any truth to that? There's, like I say, a reporting.
I don't know that there is. I'm not sure who would deny that. I don't, if there was a tomato lobby, they would be against home grow in my garden for tomatoes. I guess point is, yes, you have a very limited, very fraught, very uncertain market. You have people risking millions and tens of millions of dollars. And you have competition that's undefined. Right? You can't quantify. I think anyone who wanted to make money from cannabis had some level of opposition to home grow, and different companies got involved with those things in different ways. Some cared about them. And frankly, honestly, even if you paid me, I couldn't tell you what specific companies' positions were.
Sure.
But I think, I don't think there can be any argument that no industry that is highly speculative and risky, and in fact illegal federally, where there's such high regulation and risk of losing your license and incredible amount of cost, and you come into that, and then you have no idea of who will buy and who will grow, and how that market will break down. I think some folks were more interested in not starting there, but getting there, while others were deathly opposed to it. And nothing's changed. I mean, why don't you have significant cannabis reform over the last few years? I'm sure that was on your list of questions for me.
I did tell one person, one of my good friends, that I'd be having a cannabis lobbyist on, and they said, quote, I said, just let me know if you want me to ask anything. And they said, quote, I mean, just what the fuck is happening, and will they ever pass anything? LOL. But we can get into that later. But anyways, you were saying. Sure. I mean, go take it if you want.
I can answer it for you if you want, and answer your friend. I don't anticipate anything happening imminently.
Yeah.
I personally do not currently have a cannabis client. I have one hemp client, but a client that doesn't sell retail, so is not, might still get banned, unfortunately, at the federal level, but they're not, they do B2B sort of CBD oil sales. And I don't represent a cannabis client currently, but I'm sort of aware of the atmosphere, and my perspective is I don't see anything happening imminently. There doesn't seem to be critical mass behind it. And here's the thing. Who does the current state of affairs benefit? Right. I think it tends to benefit most people who can afford lobbyists.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, like, you're probably not seeing that energy we saw in 2019, where there probably maybe even were some lobbyists you don't see anymore. There's probably a lot of energy back then that maybe you don't see. Um, uh, but also, as you mentioned earlier, maybe there are like lobbyists there. Like as you said, some of the most important work is maintaining the status quo. you know.
Yeah, I don't think at this point anybody has to work very aggressively to um, block things from happening, although that did happen at one point. Let me just say this without necessarily getting into a lot of details, but I'm a medical patient. If I had a medical cannabis dispensary that was closer to me than the one I go to now, I would probably go to the closer one. So if you want to, it's just not hard. If you want to see why medical access is expanded, you start by saying, well, who would lose market share from it?
This is actually, I think, a great example, Mark, of what you were talking about earlier, where it's like you and I would argue these merits, but then maybe somebody that held those licenses, they would come in with a merit-based argument too, right? Where it's like, hey, we had the original 55 licenses. And even if we disagree with them, like, okay, like that's wrong. But they're like, hey, we had the original 55 licenses. And since 2014 or whatever, we've been paying these fees. I'm sorry, but this is our market. And if you
Right.
want,
Right. They're not going to make that argument. And that's not the argument that was made to do.
Oh, okay.
So now there is an argument to be made that that the argument that was initially made was we risked tens of millions of dollars while everybody else sat on the sidelines and watched us make it work or not. Right.
That's kind of, what I was trying to,
Right. And so, to go back to what you were saying, that's sort of our thing, but it's not based on, well, too bad we had it, so we're going to keep it. It's based on the risks were ours, so should some of the rewards be. But that's not the argument you're going to hear. You're going to hear, well, of course, we're all for medical, but we have to do it right.
Right.
Okay. And then you fill in the blanks. So, you're not going to hear people, lobbyists telling legislators, well, we had the monopoly and we deserve to keep it, God damn it. And screw those patients that have to drive 3 hours. They're going to say, oh, yeah, absolutely. But worry about this and this and this and how it's applied. And, here's what these new people who are going to compete with us going to have to do that we currently do. And, oh, by the way, if you expand access to medical, guess how much tax money the state is going to lose?
Right.
And those are the kinds of arguments that are made. You're not going to hear somebody say, we want the business. You're going to hear somebody say, well, it just has to be worked out to make sure it's safe and there's no diversion and that patients are still treated special so that they can still get access to their, medicine before recreational users can get theirs. And again, how much tax money that goes to drug prevention and crime reduction do you want to give up, state of Illinois? But again, whatever those arguments are, they're certainly very merit-based, right?
Right.
And a lot and easy to understand. As is, no different than I'm a patient. I should have access closer to my house. And that's where you get started. But the reality is that, cannabis patients don't have a lobbyist.
Right. Yeah. And I know that somebody in my audience would ask about that. It's something that we try to focus on. So I appreciate you covering that because Yeah. I mean, you have people that maybe are more aware of the issues as lawmakers, and so they can sort of act as, exercise their influence there. But like you say, there's not like I can't just go down to Springfield and talk about all these hippy dippy ideas that I have, like, oh, free the plant, home grow for all. Like, I'd love to go down there and spend my time doing that, but you already know that, like, you got to eat, you got to sleep somewhere, you got to have your nice clothes, and be at the right place at the right time. Like, it's kind
Yeah.
of
Hey, I'll tell you, for January, beginning of January through the end of May, an Airbnb in Springfield ain't cheap. I know from experience.
yeah, yeah. I can tell you from experience that what is cheap is you build a van, a camper van. That's cheaper. There's complications though. Anyways, that's my parents say I'm the hippie with the van down by the river. So anyways,
Hey,
sounds
you know what? That I grew up with those, so
yeah.
I'm a big fan.
So nothing's happening imminently is the long story short of, I guess, what you're feeling cannabis policy wise. At least at a
I
state
don't
level.
I don't see any critical mass movement, frankly, on cannabis or hemp at the state level. Again, admittedly, I'm not a cannabis lobbyist right now, so I'm not plugged in at
Yeah.
at the same level. I'm not paying the same level of attention, but it's just not something I see talked a lot about. You don't see it moving through committee. And a lot of times it becomes what we call a Christmas tree. Everybody tries to hang their own ornament on it, and it dies of its own weight.
Yeah.
So I think that in the near future, the only way anything will pass is if the governor and or the legislative leaders make it a big priority.
Gotcha. Yeah. And on this, I'm going to share a graphic from a cannabis artist that I really like. His name is Box Brown. People can view his work at boxbrown.com. He's been on the show in the past, and I think I've even got a couple books of his above my shoulders here. And I wanted to ask you, like, so one of the things he says in this comic, which I thought was interesting, he's talking about the Netherlands, and he says, one of my concerns is losing momentum for legalization. And again, he uses the Netherlands as an example. He says the Netherlands has a small, hobbled together cannabis market riddled with major problems. And he has a picture of a person illegally transporting weed from an illegal grow to a legal shop. In case people didn't know, that's what's weird. You go to the shop in the Netherlands and it's legal, but like we just don't talk about how it got there. Sound familiar, by the way? And he says, but they've lost the political will to fix the problems because the average person sees the cannabis issue as over. And he says, with an estimated 350,000 weed arrests in the USA in 2020 and being at the precipice of a national corporate oligopoly, we can't lose the energy to legalize. And it's just this idea, I think, to maybe water it down a bit. Like, there's a weed store. Like, this is what my parents say to me when they're like, you're still doing that podcast? There's a weed store, Cole. What's the big fucking deal? Right? That's kind of the average person's view on it. It's like, the issue is over, Cole. Get over it. We've got bigger fish to fry.
That is so funny because it totally tracks the lobbyist experience, because one of the things that was a common refrain, after adult use passed, people would say to me all the time, "Oh, congratulations on that. So what are you going to do now?" And it was like, well, I don't know. Alcohol been legal for 100 years. What are the, myriad, the beer distributors of Illinois are one of the most powerful groups in Springfield.
True.
It's like, so, just because something becomes legal doesn't mean it stops being regulated and stops being political. And just because it's legal doesn't mean that the government can't help pick winners and losers.
Yeah.
And And that's what happened. So yeah, it's like, well, it's legal now, so forget about it. And so it's like, well, okay, cars are legal, but there's a auto podcast, I'm sure, right?
Sure.
It's like baseball's legal, but there's a baseball podcast. So I don't know, but that, that's a vibe that
Well, I guess what I
really
was saying
don't
is
know.
like I want more out of our cannabis policy, like homegrown
Sure.
for all and everything else. And they're like, when is it enough for you? And it's like, well, when it's treated like tomatoes.
There you go. And again, I totally get it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, for most people, they're not there with you. They're going to run
Right.
down to the dispensary, get what they want, and move on. And it's actually a very important lesson that I've also learned, that just because I think something is important doesn't mean it actually is.
Right.
So we think this stuff might be important, but the world has moved on. Now, what's unfortunate is that more and more of these licenses are gonna start becoming distressed assets, because the world has not been fair, and now you sort of have even more issues coming up where, under certain circumstances, the 1,500-foot rule isn't going to apply when dispensaries open next to each other. And then you have, certainly a lot of people who, will still drive to Michigan or whatnot. So point is that, again, the people who need the change the most will generally be able to affect it the least. And most people move on to the next thing. This has been done. And so your parents' attitude is very much in line.
Yeah. With the pulse. That's
Right.
the reality I needed to hear. It's just not what I want to hear sometimes.
Right. But look, moonshining used to be illegal, or is illegal, but home brewing and home wine stuff are not. So I think things evolve over time, but I think realistically people forget that it's still federally illegal.
Yeah.
Like, most people don't even want to touch this stuff.
True.
And the stigma is still there. So it's just hard to get the ball rolling.
Right. Right. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about with regard to like cannabis policy in Illinois, and we can start with home grow, but we can also go to something that I recently have actually personal experience with, not just hearsay, if you will. Um, uh, it seems like law enforcement, I guess, is very involved in drug policy in Illinois. I'll just say, but with regard to cannabis policy, because I know they've reviewed. I read their reports for this year where they've reviewed psychedelic bills that I'm sure you were referencing earlier. They mentioned that it just seems like they're very involved. So I had heard that not only that some of these licensed cultivators lobbied against home grow, but that law enforcement did as well. And also, fun fact, folks, even if adult use home grow would have came to be as it was originally written, at least from an info session that Representative Staines and Cassidy hosted, and Senator Cassidy, I meant to say, sorry, Representative Cassidy, Senator Staines, there would have been a registry for all adults. Just like, I don't know, a lot of people don't talk about that. I personally wouldn't have been very comfortable with that. So it's interesting. But anyways, I'm not trying to get
Well,
too
there's a
caught up
lot
in
of
the details.
misconception. There's a lot of misconception. Somebody the other day said to me, well, I wish you guys would allow it so I could just, throw the seeds in the ground in March or April and have plants come up in my backyard. And I was like, Sorry, pal. You'd have to grow it in a locked closet with lights.
Right.
You know, so home grow doesn't mean natural grow. It means like in the house in a locked, you know, compartment or whatever, or room, or
Basically, I think they
yeah,
literally
so,
use that word somewhere in the home grow
yes,
law.
yeah. So the point is yes, most. That's the other thing about lobbying. Everybody has an opinion, but not everybody's opinion is on the actual facts of the legislation. And people will make it sort of a proxy for much larger cultural fights. But in Illinois, law enforcement, um, the Illinois Chiefs of Police, the Illinois Sheriff's Association are do generally very actively get involved in drug stuff. Now, sometimes I'm more comfortable with that involvement than other times. I don't. I think they have every right and should be involved in helping all of us understand how they might do their job right. But I do think that they should leave the moral stuff out. Like, you know, if something is more, you know, focused on making sure that police people have the tools that they need and all that stuff, that's great, that they're protected, whatever. And I know I packed a lot in those few dismissive phrases, but I don't think they should be sort of getting close to the line of being the moral police as well as the actual police. Like, we don't need law enforcement telling us what substances people should be free to use and not to use. I think they should be much more focused on, well, you know, here's the test we need to make sure is legal in order to make sure that they're not intoxicated while they're driving.
Yeah.
I think that's certainly within their purview. In Illinois, I think there is a tendency to get over those skis and to get, you know, but look, these are all folks who have the best intentions, right? Like, you know, I don't think that you know, anybody sitting there with the intent of needlessly hurting people. I think they all think that they're doing the right thing. I just wish there was more agreement in society about what the right thing is.
Yeah. I mean, this example that I was going to bring up that I have some personal experience is I think a good example of it. And it's like, I want to give all of these people that I saw and heard and testimony, like the benefit of the doubt and committee, that they, you know, again, it's like a case where it's like, I think they believe what they say. I don't think they're, like you say, trying to mislead anybody. I think they're just truly fighting for what they see as a danger, I guess. Either
They are misled, not misleading.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, and it could be something as simple as like literally, yeah, like you said, being misled. Like, hey, if we allow if we remove odor proof from the container language, then we effectively lose the ability to search a vehicle, like just based on the smell of cannabis alone. Uh, so we should not like allow, like you know, that might be something that is kind of told to you and it's a true fact, and as a result, like you might go to a different conclusion though. You might be like, well, that's gonna mean everybody's gonna be driving high, and so you might honestly go to Springfield and testify in committee that you're concerned about it as a law enforcement officer, again giving
Right.
benefit of the doubt. But like, for
Right.
example, some of the things I saw, and this was reported on by Capital News, Illinois. This is one of those examples where I'm like, okay, this is crazy. And I want to just see if you can spot it. Mark, I won't take too much time, but like this was, again, reported by Capital News, Illinois. This container was brought to this hearing that I was present at. What do you, and I'm sorry if it's, I can zoom it in. Whoops. Didn't know if you noticed anything about this container, just as a person that's been to a dispensary in Illinois.
It's not labeled.
Also, what is it labeled? Do you see that right there?
No, I can't.
I'll read it for you. It says raspberry gummies, 100 milligrams.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's mislabeled to the extent that it's labeled.
Yeah, and so law enforcement brought this in and passed it around to lawmakers and like, this is an odor-proof container. This is what's from the dispensary. And it's like, first of all, like that weed looks so shitty. Second of all, the product's not labeled properly and it's mislabeled as like there's just layers to it. And I'm like, okay, that did seem a little bit misleading.
Well, and again, it's well-intentioned people who don't know what the hell they're doing.
Right.
One of the things about being prohibitionist is you're not the best expert on the topic that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
So here's my point. And it's like, so you've established two sides, right?
Yeah.
You've established the side that is anti odor-proof regulation and pro odor-proof regulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're each making a merit-based argument.
Right.
And here come I, and I'm going to throw a whole monkey wrench into this whole discussion, because I will point out to you, if everything was odor-proof in a dispensary, it wouldn't stink like weed.
Right.
Okay? Show me an odor-proof container at a dispensary. 90% of them are not. Okay? When I have a plastic bag with product that I'm driving home from a dispensary, I have a small SUV. So the air is the same. There's no trunk even. And I can put it out of the reach of the driver, which I do.
Sure.
But it's not odor-proof.
Right.
Okay? So this is the insane thing.
I just want to get to the original example. Sorry to cut you off, but the original, when you go into a dispensary, it smells, and just for people that don't know, they're not packaging it up in the back. It comes pre-packaged, which means the reason you can smell it is because it's not
odor-proof.
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Now, in a 15 drive home, my car is not going to smell like a dispensary. But if I'm driving from Chicago to Springfield, who knows? So that's my point is that there's this ridiculous argument about a thing that doesn't exist. Yeah. And that's what the problem is with cannabis policy. There is no such thing in Illinois dispensaries for the most part as an odor-proof container. Unless there's a definition of what that is that's imperfect to a ridiculous degree.
I always say there's great odor mitigation containers. There's no such thing as odor proof, and the canine experts testified as such. Like, and I've got that on my website. Right. The reason they use canines is because they have a sense of smell that can just get anything. I mean, the cartel has been trying to figure out the odor-proof container for years. They can't figure it out because canines.
There you go. And they have a profit motive that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And are willing to kill people to develop the science. And they still can't do it. So again, it's almost like I heard a good description of religious war recently, that it's like two friends arguing about whose imaginary friend is better. And here you have two sides arguing about whose imaginary container is better. Because that container, for the most part, is not reality. So, I mean, would somebody at least please acknowledge that?
Well, and what was frustrating was it's like, just, you know, I'm there as a consumer. I even bought a pack of pre-rolls before and didn't open the bag. I brought my receipt and everything. Of course, they canceled the hearing, but I stunk up the hearing, and one of the representatives actually, they were like, "Is that you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I promise I didn't do anything wrong. I was like, "Here's the bag," and I was able to educate them. I also ran into Jeremy Gorner from the Chicago Tribune, and he was like, "Damn," he's like, "This reeked up the whole hallway," and I was like, "Again, not open."
Right.
But anyways, I digress.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, if there is a, you know,
what I meant to say, Mark, was I was a little frustrated. Sorry, just to complete that thought. There weren't any dispensary owners there, and I almost get it to an extent. Like, it's frustrating because it's like, man, that would be really powerful if a dispensary owner was like, "Guys, we're doing everything by the book, and these containers truly are not overproof." But at the same time, why would they do that? Yeah. Why would they do that?
Why would I go and cause myself to have a whole new expense?
Right. Well, and potential, like, if you're saying that, technically, I think the law says it should be sold in odor-proof containers. So, like, if you're admitting, I don't know. There's just like,
again, I'm sure there's something, but the point is, at the very least, they'd say, "Well, go back and find odor-proof containers and repackage everything."
True.
You know, why would I cost myself? And again, it's not like if somebody gets busted because their car stinks, it's any skin off my teeth as a dispensary owner, especially if the dispensary owner is a shareholder. That's a long way to go from, you know, somebody getting hassled by the cops in Peoria to, you know, the billionaire in Miami.
Yeah.
But that's exactly the kind of thing that is, and it's a great example of policy making.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times I like to tell my clients that it's a very imprecise science. You know, again, I this is not an original graphic, and it was a graphic, so I have a hard time paraphrasing sometimes, but I tell my clients that lawmaking, you know, for legislators, if they set out to make a horse and they cross an elephant with a zebra and get a donkey, they say, "Oh my God, that's so close. Let's call it a day and go have dinner."
Yeah.
It's not, well, that's the other thing that I think is, you know, makes our system a little more dysfunctional and needed, is because, you know, we always assume that legislation is passed after a great amount of technical learning and deliberation. And sometimes legislation isn't even only not voted on, but legislation isn't even proposed by people who know what the hell they're talking about.
Right. I mean, is the legislation often even written by the legislators? I know that's a very generic question. I'm sure that some do.
But the easiest thing really is not even that. What most people don't understand is that there's an official draft that everybody looks at.
Yeah.
So anything that you or I or a legislator writes goes to the LRB, Legislative Reference Bureau, and they produce the official draft that then becomes the introduced legislation. So there's never anything that a legislator writes that actually becomes law. It's always written by the technical experts. But what you're really asking is how detailed do most legislators get in instructions to the LRB on what they want? And how well do they understand what they get back? And it depends. because again, a lot of times it's not even just the legislators, but the lobbyists that brought the issue to the legislators that should know better
Yeah.
don't know the issue. And then there are also clients who go to hire lobbyists. And some of these folks, especially like the finance bros who, made gazillions and now are playing in this game, they always think they know best. They don't need anyone to tell them. They're the shit. They're the Elon Musks of this world. And you look at what they propose to be legislation, and you're like, well, wait a minute, that's technically not possible because of this and this and this. It doesn't stop people from thinking they're right.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I'm not painting a hopeful picture, am I?
No. It's sometimes, but so these are the things. This is like the conversation I wanted to have, because I do think that cannabis. I make this joke all the time. I should have just said it instead of saying it was a joke. Cannabis is a gateway drug to politics. At least for me, it has been. And so I find it interesting to learn about this stuff in the context of a fun topic like this. And then you can apply those lessons to, like, if you want to effectuate change in how healthcare affects you, or taxes, or I don't know, just go on and on. You can come up with other issues. That point is, the lessons you learn here you can apply to other facets of your life, and that's why I find this policy so interesting. Yeah. So
Yeah. And permeates the lobby. Like sometimes I come home and I have to remind myself that I'm not lobbying my spouse. That's not the way it works.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, it's like, man, hey, I gotta stop like trying to convince people of things. Like, just turn off.
Right. When I deal with my spouse, I go right to begging. I don't even deal with the merits.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, we've covered a lot of bases. I did want to ask you about a few topics, other topics that have come up cannabis related. I'm just looking at my list to make sure I didn't reach anything, because I've been taking little notes and thoughts that come up along the way. Oh, over the years, the idea of a commission versus an agency has been debated, and I know you're not in the game right now. Like, as you say, you don't have a client right now, but I'm just curious about what you recollect or what you recall from those debates, where like the merits, I guess, on either side. And I just, before I pitch it over to you, when I've asked about this topic, I'm like, you know what, agency, commission, whatever, live stream it like they do in Massachusetts. And I'm not saying Massachusetts is perfect by any means. We've had several regulators like that are from the CCC, that have worked with the CCC. It's not perfect, but actually, as David Lakeman, who's been on this show in the past from IDOA, has said, like, at least everything is transparent, warts and all. And that's not the case with like the way that Illinois cannabis policy, or like the way things work with Illinois cannabis, the industry. It just seems like there's not a lot of publicity at all. So that's just my personal opinion. It's like, whatever you do, live stream it. That's what I say. But what do you recall about the debate, and I guess the merits on either side of the commission versus agency thing?
I suppose until something's done, the debate continues. So it's
Right.
just smoldering now rather than, a fire.
It gets brought up every once in a while. I still hear about it.
Right. Right. I mean, the bottom line is about, who controls things and who's accountable. And those are different. One is more inherently under the executive branch, under the governor, versus a commission that is, elected or appointed, but there's, some filter between the policymakers and the implementation of the policy. So I come at it from a different perspective. We are to me, so on the agency end, it's a question of whether the agency is doing its job or not, and doing its job well or not. Right now, yes, there may be different pieces of this in different agencies, but it's not necessarily a question of the meshing of the parts. It's whether each specific part is being done well or not. And if it's not being well done now, how is it going to change if it's just under one agency rather than 3 agencies? Okay, there's a reason why it hasn't improved. And that has nothing to do with how many different rooms that people sit in that are supposed to be doing this work. Okay. And then agency or commission is sort of like everything. Sometimes it's an easy way to distract from the shit that isn't getting done that's screwing the little people. Okay. I would argue that systemic change that does not happen most often because the main players in the system don't mind the status quo.
Gotcha.
Okay. And again, if you are a major player who can afford lobbyists that can interface with 2 agencies here and can afford lawyers that can sue 3 agencies over there, in some ways you're already dealing with things, and making them simpler for the next guy isn't necessarily profitable for you. So you've already figured out how to deal with this system. You've already anticipated the costs and allocated the resources and figured out how you still make money. So what is your incentive necessarily for making it more functional for others other than you?
Right.
Hopefully that makes sense. But there are specific reasons why things don't happen, as well as reasons for why things do happen. And the reality is that improving the system generally does not provide great advantage to incumbents.
Yeah. It's as you said earlier, it's the people that would benefit the most that miss out, right? Something
Yes.
like that. Yeah.
Yes. Just like, everybody knew damn well exactly what they were doing when they were saying, yes, all these major medical companies should also be able to be their own transport companies.
Right.
Right.
Because why would you hire a transporter?
And the reality is, and I apologize, I don't know if you can hear the phone ringing, but the reality is if, well, what's the best way to put it? No, well, I think the best way to put it is that inefficiencies in systems generally benefit someone. They don't exist in and of themselves.
Sure.
And so I would say that when you have the main half dozen corporate giants compelled to push for things that help their clients, their customers, then they will. Until then, they won't.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, as much as I don't like to hear it.
Yeah, the reality is that, again, just to conclude, agency versus commission is a distraction from the actual important question, which is why either is needed to make sure that people do the jobs that they should be doing now.
Yeah, I've always been confused covering this subject over the years, and when you put it that way, this all starts to make sense. There was like conversations about like, well, we can't communicate with all the agencies can't communicate with each other. It's like, the fuck are you talking about? I can reach out to each one of them. Why can't they reach out to each other? You know? And then yeah, there's just little things like that that I've heard over the years that like if you just like they say it, and if you just let it go, it's like, oh, but if you like really just think about it, it's like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You can't talk to each other.
It's done all the time. You know, the rules process, the agency rules process is a great example. You'll reach out to an agency and say, hey, I've got a client that really has concerns about these rules that you've published. You know, published means have proposed, officially proposed. And they say, well, it's the middle of the rulemaking process. We're prohibited from talking to you. We can't because you're an interested party to the process. And then you go talk to legislators, especially legislators in JCAR, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, which oversees the rules process. And they're like, no, these people are just lazy. They have every right and actual reason we tell them to talk to you guys, so it doesn't have to come to us. We don't want to referee your fights. You should be able to work them out. But the easiest thing for the agency to say is, well, it doesn't look good for us to talk to you because, you know, we don't want to be unduly influenced. Well, you're proposing stupid rules. You were already unduly influenced. We just want to talk some sense into you. So, you know, can't and won't are different.
Yeah. What do you recall about the whole fight on hemp? Because that I feel like was the closest thing that we saw to. I wouldn't say. I mean, there was a grassroots element of the movement. Like that's why I was involved, and I definitely knew others that were coming at this from a small business perspective, like legitimately. Like and I'm just a consumer. I knew other people that just showed up as consumers. That, like I said, it was just like, look, access to seeds, which by the way, the cannabis companies benefit from too. We're gonna have to go back to the days. You actually, I think, taught me this concept through your podcast. We're gonna go back to the days of immaculate conception with seeds. That's what you taught me. But so anyways, I'm just trying to paint the picture that I definitely approached this, and I knew people that approached this from a grassroots perspective. I also know that there was a lot of money on the table as well. I'm just trying to paint a picture, and I want you to, and also maybe jog your memory. I heard JB was boots on the ground. I heard some of the people from the Cannabis Regulation Office was boots on the ground. I want to hear about your thoughts on those days or that time period. Also, is it just generally speaking, is it normal that like the governor and regulators get involved in a policy like that? Sorry for throwing multiple questions your way.
Yeah, no. Well, so you're triggering my PTSD because my whatever 5 years of making sure hemp wasn't banned were the most stressful of my life. I've constantly felt like there was a sword, you know, of Damocles hanging over me, and you know, my friends would be like, well, no, Mark isn't crazy. Somebody is actually trying to kill him. Towards the end, the executive branch got very, very heavily involved. Hemp came pretty close to being banned in the last lame duck session. Because the governor's office was pushing so heavily for it. And it was one of the most exhilarating moments of my life to withstand that and make sure hemp didn't get banned. But it is somewhat unusual for state I just got telling you how prudish these folks can be. Well, we're not supposed to talk to you. Having them going out and actively lobbying against one industry for another is incredibly unusual, I think. It happens with some regularity, for example, renewable energy. You certainly have folks in government who are very supportive. But this kind of retail, like calling legislators on the weekend leading up to the vote, the governor getting on the phone and calling legislators himself, the mayor of Chicago getting on the phone and calling legislators himself, having to provide lists of legislators who the mayor should call, gives one a sort of an interesting perspective on things. But it was a huge fight. It was a very unfair fight, I will say. And it goes to something we were talking about earlier, people have moved on, right? They weed's legal. You can go to the dispensary and get it, move on. And that's sort of what happened with cannabis until with hemp until the cannabis industry, about, I don't know now, late teens, early 20s, the cannabis industry came in very hot and heavy. And, at that point, I actually was working for the industry association as an advisor. I was hired by a bunch of hemp people. And it was a, multi-year slog because every year we came close to being banned. And actually, I'm very angry and frustrated with all the dropped balls at the federal level that allowed hemp to be banned at the federal level. Again, I don't particularly have, sympathy for the bad operators who were selling, Doritos to 14-year-old kids. But there's, on the other hand, as I said, my spouse and a bunch of other suburban moms are much partial to THC drinks than alcoholic drinks. But so at the national level, they did not do any of the things that we did in Illinois and some other successful states have done to make sure that hemp wasn't banned. And I could go through a whole list. It's sort of and again, I have no, I think more highly of our successful strategies and our own skill in that than some others might, right? There are others who might attribute hemp success in Illinois to a myriad of factors, but it was one of the reasons why I don't miss those days is I don't miss waking up with an automatic pit in my stomach. Like, I dreaded reaching for my phone every day in the morning. And that's, I certainly have contentious issues now, but not like that. Yeah, when the governor and the lieutenant governor are calling legislators to ask them to, ban your industry, it's frustrating. But it's also really frustrating that they never did understand just how ham-handed some of their stuff was. Like, the way the legislation that they ultimately pushed would have banned regular CBD. Okay. But, it doesn't seem, so in Illinois, pet owners got involved. At the national level, we haven't seen much involved. it is amazing to me that at the national level, you don't have any consumers speaking for hemp. It's all hemp company owners. That's the main lobby against this ban. And as long as that's the case, as long as, veterans aren't as involved as they need to be, as long as people of color are not, I can't believe the Black Caucus nationally in Congress was more involved in the hemp deliberations. And one of my arguments always has been there are a lot of people of color who went into hemp because they couldn't get into cannabis. And the cannabis folks will say to me, well, we've played by the rules. It's only fair. But I can actually say to some of these people, yes, but I was there when I helped you write the rules that you played by.
Right.
And that's fine. That's what, we're all grown-ups. This is lobbying. This is public policy. It's, as we said earlier, sausage making. But, for the main cannabis behemoths in this country to sit there with a straight face and say they're just playing by the rules, and all these little scrappy hemp owners are disenfranchising them. Somewhat cynical, because you wrote the rules to be what they are. You had much access to writing the rules as anybody else. Sorry for the tangent, but get back.
Yeah.
What you were talking about, that was a surreal. The 2004, 2005, that winter, the lame duck session in January, that was brutal. But we remained standing. So I do take it as a point of personal pride, I guess.
I mean, look, yeah, it does speak to the power that it had, and I really think it. It's funny. I googled your name earlier, and I saw you had wrote an op-ed maybe for Crane's Chicago Business. I don't know. I'd have to look.
Yeah,
But you were basically talking about the issue with cannabis licensing, and it wasn't so much focused on what I'm about to say. It was more talking about the KPMG scoring and sort of the debacle that surrounded that. You did touch on, though, the confidentiality provisions that I have a lot of complaints about, and the Chicago Tribune has reported on in the past, because it's just it's very opaque, I guess, to put in short, who owns licenses and everything like that. Which I've come to learn has proven problematic in other industries. But I sort of got lost in that thought. What I meant to kind of roundabout sort of come around to was, it really seems like the people that were participating in hemp, I always like to say in air quotes, were literally just aspiring cannabis entrepreneurs that got the only cannabis license they could. I interviewed David Lakeman, and I asked him, if I wanted to get a hemp license today, if I wanted to get a hemp license, when could I get it? And he said, Cole, if you would have applied this morning, you would have been leaving with one this afternoon. Which I've been told is maybe not always the case, but anyways, ideally that's the way that it goes, right? And so that, I think, that was the entry point, right, to actually sell cannabis in some fashion in the state of Illinois. Because otherwise, I always tell people, I've had people, and I feel so bad, I've had people that have got out of prison for a cannabis offense, and Cole, I'm out of prison and it's finally legal and I want to get involved. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I don't have good news for you. You're not going to be able to get involved. And it just seems like hemp was it, and I don't know, just, do you have any thoughts on that specifically?
Yeah, I don't.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, I've literally had, sorry to extend my point briefly, but I've had some of these social equity licensees come on the show, these people that have the card stacked against them. And in one breath, they're complaining about the vault requirements and the security requirements and everything, that the data storage that comes with the surveillance. And then they're like, and these motherfuckers open up a hemp shop. And I'm like, yes, I get why that's unfair to you, but like, how are you complaining about the regulations and in the same breath like fighting for them? I get it in self-interest, but like, I've always asked, I guess, Mark, to just round out my question, like, why haven't these people tried to take the best parts of hemp policy and leave the rest, but maybe I'm just being too idealistic here. um,
It's all about winners and losers. That's all about. And by the way, the little guys are hurt by hemp, especially the little guys who might have one adult use dispensary and then a hemp shop opens up across the street. When I worked for hemp, I criticized those things. There are a lot of people in hemp who are getting what they deserve because they didn't care about anyone else or anything else. They weren't necessarily the target audience for, social equity. And so it would be unfair to say that every hemp owner or every hemp business deserves a chance because they didn't get a chance in cannabis. I will say, though, that again, it's unfortunate because hemp could have been used to fix cannabis. Okay? Because it is one plant and it does all deserve the same rules. And the rules by which hemp was governed are in some ways, or the rules that were proposed even by my clients with very strict hemp regulation and taxation would have, just as an example, made the hemp business more expensive because of regulation. And that would have served to level the playing field with the expensively regulated cannabis, right? But they always wanted to kill hemp. They either wanted to own it, and if they couldn't own it, they wanted to kill it. And it's unfortunate because I think the answer was, rather than making the hemp system as stupid as the rest of the cannabis dispensary system, why don't you make the cannabis laws and rules more common sense and logical now that we've learned so much from hemp? So there was, a few years ago, the roads separated and they could have gone down one, but they chose to go down another, which was, rather than in any way live with hemp, the cannabis industry, the large players in the cannabis industry, wanted to kill hemp. And they knew they could, and they were successful. The incompetence of the national hemp lobby is just hard to stomach, that they let this happen. The arrogance of the national hemp lobby is somewhat stunning because they think that hemp company owners rather than consumers should have the voice. So it's, again, it's hard to, I have always been very clear. I even told my clients, there are a lot of you guys that should be banned. If right now you sell hemp to people under 21, you should be banned. It should, another thing that lobbyists often say to their clients, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I look, if we had another 6 hours, you could make this a mini series. I've got a lot of stuff on hemp to get out, but the reality is it was a very interesting time. It continues to be an interesting time. And it's unfortunate that some of the best, most innovative, most socially responsible businesses I know will be killed just like the idiots selling Doritos. And that's sad.
Yeah. Well, I would love to have you back on, and we don't always have to spend. I'm glad you gave me as much as your time, but when we come back, we can just talk about policy, whatever. And it doesn't even have to be cannabis policy because I do have, like I said, people from the Tribune on, especially during the heated seasons, and we've talked about anything and everything. So if there's anything, just know that you're welcome here. And I did. Want to apologize for triggering your PTSD on him. And also, I just was curious, like, it is interesting, and we'll start to round out this conversation because you have been very charitable with your time, and I do appreciate. People love the long format conversation. Since you're a fan, you probably know it's kind of like one of my favorite things to do. Just sit down and have a heart to
Absolutely.
heart. So,
Yeah,
but
my drive to Springfield is 3 hours door to door. So some of your longer ones I actually like.
nice, nice, nice. Hell yeah. Well, thank you again. And I'm just curious as since you step away or as we step away from hemp, it's interesting to see like the United Center, sign that deal with a big company here in Illinois. I'm not gonna give free advertising. You can if you want, but I've also seen like I say I'm not going to give free advertising, but it is interesting to see like big gas stations like Circle K, like really leaning in Illinois. Like they've got
Mhm,
a big THC drink. I'm starting to see it all
mhm,
down north and the south of the state. Neiman's, like
mhm.
Benny's. They continue to really sell, and some people will tell me, Cole, they're trying to get rid of their supply. Of course, they're doing that. Um, it's just weird to me to see like the United Center sign a 3-year deal. Do you think there's any way there's going to be like a beverage carve out at the federal level, or do you hear anything like that? It just seems weird that like these big, huge corporate brands are seemingly investing in it as it's on its way out. There's like 200 days left or something.
Right. Well, so I think selling it while they can rather than investing in it are different.
Right.
Right. So I'm sure there is nothing in the United Center agreement that says they'll continue to sell it after it becomes federally illegal. Right.
True.
Uh, so on the upside, why not take the money off the table while you can, and maybe promote yourself to the suburban moms that like those drinks more than they like buying beers at the Hawks game. Um, uh, how much they're investing remains unclear. I think the the people who had been investing, and by the way, I will promote and name check a company that used to be a client, a drink called Plift, and I'm sure you know Glenn. Um, but the main reason why I name check the drink is because my wife is a big fan of it. So it's like just like Warren Buffett, I like to sort of invest in the things that I myself or those around me find valuable. So, you know, Glenn's one of the good guys. He knows this stuff backwards and forwards. His background is as a corporate cannabis compliance guy. He's doing everything right. His products are beyond reproach. And again, I say that not because I'm making any money from him, but because he's making money off my wife when she buys it at Binny's these days. Um, and I just am heartbroken over what would happen to Plift, a company with several owners, one of whom is a woman and one of whom is black. This is a black-owned company, a woman-owned company, and they have worked their butts off. They've raised millions of dollars. They have a fantastic product. And unless something changes, their livelihood, this incredible business they've built is going to be destroyed. God, I hope he doesn't hear this, because on the one hand, I'm praising him. On the other hand, I'm going to make him depressed as hell. But, so for me, this is very, very personal. This is happening to, look, again, it's happening to some people that I think well damn deserve it and worse, but it's also happening to people I happen to particularly hold in high regard as people who, I always talk, a lot of times I'll say this about legislators, but there are people who pass my shit test. I have all sorts of great sayings. This is one of them for you. Sorry, I'm such an idiot, but I sort of I'll tell a legislator, you pass my shit test because you give a shit and you know your shit. And Glenn passes my shit test. He gives a shit and he knows his shit. And Plift is a great product because of that. And I'm, my wife, the consumer, and her friends are going to be sad to see it go. It is going to lead to more unhealthy alternatives like liquor. And it's going to destroy really innovative, really good investments that people have staked their lives on. Do I hope there's a carve out? I do. Do I see it? Do I see anything happening as we speak? No. And again, in part, that is because I am not seeing what seems to be happening in Washington is all these rich hemp guys have hired a bunch of lobbyists. But the stories being told are, sort of the most sympathetic is the poor hemp farmer who's still sort of on the business end rather than the consumer end. Why, suburban moms who swear by this stuff haven't been a platform, I don't understand.
Well, and I'll just say, as somebody that went to Springfield and spoke to my representative on this, I remember there was somebody walking out. I don't know who they were, but they're like flipping a notepad, and they're like, "Who are you and who are you representing?" And I'm not trying to like talk down on they're just busy, right? And I said, "Oh, I'm Cole. I'm just here to talk to you about a personal issue of mine. I'm just a person. Like, I'm not representing a business or anything."
Well, did you use the magic word constituent?
Yeah. Well, yes. I'm your
Okay.
constituent as well. Yeah.
Okay.
I said I live in your district and everything. And yeah, but
Yeah, there you
but
go.
they look up at me, right, and actually have that eye contact. And I guess that's my point. Like, it's pretty simple. It's just that, no offense, Mark, but they thought I was a lobbyist. Like, they were kind of like, "Who are you and who you represent?" And it's like,
Absolutely, which is why I almost in any imaginable situation, my job is to facilitate the client telling their story,
yeah,
rather than me telling their story. And they might have different reactions to different lobbyists at different times, and they're busy, but having an actual human who's a constituent who has a story is incredibly compelling. One of the things that early in my career, when I worked for politicians, one of the things that was my job at certain times was just answering the phone and keeping a stick count. Anytime there was a controversial issue, the phone would ring a lot, and this was before email, and we just keep for and against. Okay, and a lot of times a legislator would come by and say, "What's the count?" Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to stick my finger in the air and just gauge whatever's the most popular, etc. But if the, if the legislator happens to be a farmer and they are, expert in fuel and fertilizer and sort of tractor intellectual property and all the amazing other things that they have to be experts on, they may not be experts on medicine. And so having somebody who is an expert on medicine tell the story on medicine to a farmer is very, very important. But it's also very, very important they act like you did, like a normal human, rather than some oracle imparting wisdom from on high. And it just depends on how you approach people. And it depends, look, I have gotten much more successful lobbying done by being stupid and pitiful than I have by being smart and powerful.
Yeah.
People, if to help my client, I have to have somebody take pity on me at the Capitol, so be it.
Empathy.
Much much de-emphasized when it should be emphasized.
Yeah. Well, hey, like I said, like you said earlier, I could talk to you for 6 hours, and I do want to, like I said, have you back on. I'll reach out to you, but as I said, you can reach out to me anytime you'd like. I wanted to thank you for your time. I'm sure you get thanked for your work in the form of compensation, but as a consumer, I wanted to thank you for your work and the progress that you've carved out. Again, not only did you inspire, but like as you said, since you were involved in cannabis policy, one could argue you were also instrumental in helping me come out of the cannabis closet, because I wouldn't be sparking up on this podcast or on the internet if it weren't for the progress we've made. So, like, seriously, thank you for your time, for your work, for your inspiration. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. It was a joy to talk to you, and I appreciate all the time you devoted to listening to listening to me talk.
Yeah, that's what I'll ask you before you go. Did you have a good time today? Did you have a good time on the show?
I had a great time. I mean, I generally, as you can already tell, I am somebody who is not averse to hearing myself talk. But also there are relatively few outlets where you can talk about a lot of the things that we talked about and to feel understood. And sort of technically understood, but also like know where I'm coming from, kind of understood. And so that is very validating, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope this served as a form of therapy in a way. And I guess we'll end on that. Happy Friday. And we'll keep in touch. Okay. I want to have you back on the show. So, folks, I hope you found as much value in this conversation as I did. And we will see you on the next episode of The Cole Memo. Take care, everybody.